Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement interview with expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and host of this program. Without any further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful guest today. Dr. Marilyn Heins graduated from Radcliffe College, which is now part of Harvard University, and received her MD degree from the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia University. She interned in pediatrics at New York Hospital and completed a residency in pediatrics at Babies Hospital in New York. She served as Director of Pediatrics at Detroit Receiving Hospital and Director of Project RESCAD, R-E-S-C-A-D, a federally funded program to provide comprehensive health services for medically indigent children. She was Associate Dean for Student Affairs at Wayne State University School of Medicine and Vice Dean and Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. Marilyn was a member of the editorial board of the Journal of the American Medical Association, served on the National Board of Medical Examiners, chaired the Committee on Medical Education of the American Hospital Association, and served as the first woman chair of the Group on Student Affairs of the Association of American Medical Colleges. She's been active in many professional and community organizations, focusing on women's and children's health, parenting education, and women's issues. Her special interests in pediatrics include helping parents and teaching health professionals how to help parents. She's published 57 scientific papers and is co-author of Child Care, Parent Care, and author of Parent Tips for Effective, Enjoyable Parenting, as well as her new book, which is now in its second edition, A Traveler's Guide to Geriatrica. Marilyn was the producer and host of a weekly call-in radio program called The Parenting Show, which aired on KNST, Tucson's leading talk radio station, for 2 years. She's written over 1,100 parenting columns for the Arizona Daily Star and continues to write. She met her husband, a veterinarian, Dr. Milton Lipson, while on vacation in Jamaica. They moved to Tucson in 1979 and were married for 47 years until his death in 2007. 7 years ago, a friend introduced Marilyn to Dr. Milt Francis, a recent widower. The two have been together ever since. She has a son and daughter, 3 grandchildren, 2 stepsons, and 3 step-grandsons. And Marilyn is a force to be reckoned with. She's just turned 92. And Milt, her partner, is going to be turning 100 in May. So I've said to Marilyn, although we've had people close in age, she is, I think, the oldest person that I've interviewed. And I want to say happy birthday to you, since it was just recently that you had a birthday. And I'm so happy you are with us. I just want to mention real quickly before I start asking you questions, I just want to comment about the book and to just say that I was delighted that I was able to meet Marilyn and Milt in person in Tucson. And also I got to meet David Fitzsimmons, who's the cartoonist who has done some really wonderful cartoons for both the first and second edition. I really love your book. It combines wit and wisdom, and it's just a lovely perspective. And I feel, I want to ask you, it's coming full circle. You've been a pediatrician, and now you're really helping people make a journey as immigrants into this new land of older age. The book, just to give people a little overview of it, is 26 chapters, and it really covers absolutely everything, from downsizing to sex to having pets to dealing with AOA, which is advanced old age, and living through a lot of expected and unexpected events such as COVID. And she shares her experience with a lot of the joys and frustrations of it and has just a wonderful sense of humor. With that said, I want to just welcome you, Marilyn. I'm just delighted that you're here with us. And I wonder if we can just start with what led to you writing this book and doing this and a tour guide to Geriatrica.
How did a youthful pediatrician write about all these old people?
That's a good way to put it.
Okay. You might ask how I became a writer. And actually, I've been writing since childhood. My first poem at age 6 was waves and waves of flame, filling the air with light, his sunset, and soon it will be night. I wasn't very good with apostrophes. And I also volunteered for my high school newspaper, and in college I wrote and helped edit the Radcliffe News. And my father suggested I ask the Boston Globe if they wanted a reporter on colleges, and they paid me 10 cents an hour. And in my professional life, I wrote professional papers and speeches, but the thing that is unusual is that as I aged, I decided someone should write about what I am going through, and that's how Geriatrica came to be.
And how did you come up with the name? Because I think you have said
sorry?
that it's...
Oh, the name?
Yeah.
It just came to me, Dorian. It was one of those lucky things.
And it is a journey that it is, and you share so many really incredible personal stories about it. I think I want to ask, just because being 92 years old, you really are a pioneer, both in the field of women in medicine, I think, as well as now an older woman in medicine and in life. I really, before we get really into the book, I just wondered, how have your experience as a woman and a doctor impacted you? Like, how many women were at medical school back when you were there, and what was it like for you? Yeah.
All right. There were 9 women in a class of 120, and that was actually, we had a large number of women compared to other medical schools. But in those days, the women were quite scarce in classes, and we had to be sure that we weren't ignored when hands were raised. It was an interesting experience. Today it's very different because there are more women now than men in medical colleges, and that's a big turnaround.
And I know you had mentioned, what was the attitude toward women doctors? Did it feel like you were constantly pushing the boundaries along the way?
Yes, I think we were pushing the boundaries, and it was because you can't compare yourself with what it would be like today, except by talking to young women doctors, which I do. I have a granddaughter who is graduating medical school this year, and if you let me brag, her twin brother is graduating law school same time.
Oh, congratulations.
And she has pointed out that because there are slightly more women than men, it really isn't the problem that it was when I went to medical school and took residency.
I do remember you saying something, maybe it was when we met and had lunch together, about that the function of women is to have babies.
Yes.
And not to necessarily have careers.
The head of the obstetrics and gynecology department on our opening day in his rotation said that the function of young women was to have babies. And I was a good student. I wrote down in my notebook, the function of young women is to have babies. And about 20 years ago, I realized I was walking down the street, and this sort of raised up into my brain, and I thought, if I saw him now, I would kick him. I really was upset by it, but had repressed it for many years.
How did you manage your career and having children? Because you had two children, right?
Yes, I have a daughter who is also a doctor. She's a psychiatrist, and I have a son who's a musician and songwriter. you'd have to really ask my children, but from my point of view, my husband was very supportive of me, and he lived closer to our house, so he was the one who did something about it when the school called and said, one of your children is sick, you have to pick him up. And that was a big part of my freedom, as it were, to practice.
It is important to have a supporting partner, or somebody at least, that can be part of that safety net, I think, as even now, as women and men pursue their careers and have children. And for so many years you were a pediatrician and have written about parenting and really reached out to so many people. And so I was wondering if you could share a little of how that experience of being a pediatrician and being in medicine has impacted how you viewed this stage of life, because in a sense you're coming maybe full circle in terms of early stages of life and now more end stages of life.
It happened, Dorian, because I myself was aging, and I started to look into the geriatrics and gerontology, the study of aging and the care of aging, and it occurred to me that this is a big topic now for me and for many other people, probably for some of the people that are listening that are retired or about to be retired. And I think that it's occurred to me that I had some things to say about aging, and hence the book.
I'm glad that you wrote the book.
Thank you.
Did writing the book, let me backtrack a minute. You talk about, in a sense, feeling like an immigrant in a new land as you were dealing with your own aging, and I think that's how you approach the book, because a lot of times people don't want to look forward and look ahead, and there's so much ageism, and yet there's a need for kind of optimistic realism because we all do age. So I was wondering if you could talk some about that, because your book really does talk about a lot of the good and the bad and the difficult issues that face all of us if we're lucky enough to live long enough.
Yes, and the issues are there, and we should be facing them. But I think that what I would like to get across is that, and I try to do this in the book, is that just as we might study babies with Dr. Spock, it's time we think about covering aging, because it is a new thing to each of us as we age. And we can help each other. We can read books. We can join organizations of aging people or aged people like this one is, and start thinking about this as a new experience. I found that writing the book helped me because I learned a great deal about aging, and I would hope that people that read the book would be able to learn something about aging too.
I think they do, in that, as I said at the beginning, you have 26 chapters and you cover so many different things in terms of fears, dangers, scams, hassles, housing, downsizing, and reaching advanced old age. You call it AOA. There's so many important parts, and you have both statistics, facts, but also part of what I really like too is that some of the stories, there's such an honesty, but it also just brings smiles, and I don't know, it's funny and profound at the same time, humorous, and humor is such an important thing. But what are some of your favorite parts of the book? Can you talk us through a little bit of it?
Dorian, that's a little bit like asking a parent who is your favorite child. It's really hard
true.
to
Sorry
do.
about that.
But I think that what I am most proud of is that it's readable, and that it can help people. And I know it has helped people because they've written to this new part of their life and go on into the aging process. I compare it a little bit to adolescence because there's many changes in our lives as there are many changes in adolescence. And I think that if we look at it that way, we have things to learn about this new phase. I think it's helpful to feel that way instead of feeling just bewildered.
I think that's an excellent point. So maybe with that, I'll break it into not such a general question, but you talk a lot about advanced old age, and I think you start kind of things that start changing in the 80s, 85, 90. Can you talk more about some of your own experiences of advanced old age and kind of some of the coping mechanisms that you've used and things that you have found really helpful and important to you that I think can be really helpful for some of the listeners?
There's no question that I myself am in advanced old age. 92 is a big number. I think the most important thing that I have learned is that I have to be careful not to do too much. I have to give myself permission to sit down and stop. I could never have done that 15 or 20 years ago. I just kept going. So I think advanced old age is a time when you have to slow down a little bit. I also think it's a time when you think about what is really most important to you. And to me, and I think to most people, it really ends up being other people, relatives, friends, people that are important to you. I think that not being alone, finding people that you can deal with is a very important part of advanced old age.
And how do you have a sense of how people can go about doing that? Since the longer we live, often the more people around us end up dying.
That is very true.
Really ill.
And I think there's a decision to be made about whether to continue to live independently or take advantage of some of the retirement communities that you can move to and find other people of the same age and also resources for people as they age. That is one way of looking at it. When the pandemic hit, Milt and I were actually going to move into one of these facilities, but the pandemic said nobody can move anywhere. And we found that we could handle our lives together quite nicely still in the home. So as long as we remain as active as we are now, we plan to stay in our home.
I did wonder about that because you had mentioned in the book the planning to, but then the impact of COVID. So right now, are you still on the waiting list? But
no, we have decided. We have decided, and it took us. The COVID's been around a long time now, and we were managing quite nicely, and decided to stay in this situation as long as we could. Obviously, things change as we age.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you said, you're 92, he's turning 100. So what have been some of the things you found helpful in helping you cope with the advanced old age? I know that you talk a lot about it in the book, and I wonder if you could share some sort of tips, in a sense, to listeners.
I think that I'm using that expression too much. I know that I'm in advanced old age because I move slower, I have less energy, it's harder to retain some memories, there's bodily changes. I've compared it to like adolescence.
Right.
But as I explain in the book, we do have a lot of changes, bodily changes, as adolescents do, but we don't get zits.
That is true. That is one of the benefits of that. although I must say incidents of sexually transmitted diseases are higher in older populations, or at least not treated sometimes, than adolescents, or young adults. So just bringing in the sex part of it there.
Yes.
But it's true, we don't get the zits. But you do mention, I think partly in the book, you talk about the 3 A's that are important. You talk about 3 C's. And the importance of curiosity. Can you share a little of that? Because I think that may be helpful for people. I think it goes along with the coping.
I could if I could remember them.
I can remind you if that would be helpful, and then you could elaborate on them.
Tell me what the 3 C's were.
The 3 C's are connection, curiosity, and compassion.
Okay. Connection is really what we're talking about. We can't go through this alone. We need to be connected, and if we're not fortunate enough to have connections in our family, we really have to look for, as I mentioned earlier, other ways to live or other ways to be with people. Compassion, it's important that we are compassionate to ourselves. We don't bemoan what we had once. We try to be happy to live in the presence of today, and that's an important way to tell yourself this is it and make the best of it.
Which ties into the 3 A's, which I'll remind you of, and I think it adds to, but you might want to expand on it. You say the 3 A's are be affectionate toward yourself, pay attention to yourself, and accept yourself for who you are.
Yeah, I think that accepting yourself for who you are is the important one, Dorian. You're not going to be what you were like in the past. You have to look at yourself today and do the best you can to accept what you are today and to make the most of it. Sometimes humor helps. Looking in the mirror, I tell myself, that can't possibly be you. Someone has done something terrible to the mirrors, that sort of thing. Little jokes. And also working, or not working, but being with other people can help us focus on the fact that we're not the only one who is living in advanced old age.
So not feeling so alone and thinking it's only us, but realizing we're part of a tribe in a sense.
Yes.
You do talk about limiting the time for pity parties. Can you?
I think what I say is it's okay to have a pity party where you sit and talk to yourself about all the things that are bothering you, but don't let it last too long.
I think you said a maximum of like 20 minutes, which is a long time, actually. But
yeah, that would be a long time.
That would be a long time.
Try to get it down to 15.
Yeah, or even less than that, maybe. But I think in the context of what you were talking about is that it's hard. There are really struggles in terms of getting older, but needing to try to, I think, as you've said, focus on what we can do, but be realistic about what we can't do anymore.
Yes.
Which I personally think is so important. And I know I have dear friends that are in their 80s and 90s, and my husband's 90, and I see it firsthand, too, and I'm in my mid-70s. For all of us, it's hard not to be afraid to reckon with both the reality of getting older, but also what we still can do. And that's what I think is so important. And I like your whole thing about being curious and connection and compassion. You talk a lot about intergenerational connection and maybe volunteer work. Can you talk a little more about that?
If you are in your aging sphere, if you are unable to do volunteer work, I think that is very important. But if you become a little bit too frail to do this, you can still help. For example, I'm very worried about what the pandemic, what COVID has done to our school-age children, because they really have lost quite a bit of their education. And these are the children that are going to grow up to be the people that run the world. So I think we have to try to find ways to help catch them up in school material and help them learn about how to. This is a worry of mine, because I really worry about the lack of school for this 2 years worth of schooling. And I'm hoping that we find ways to deal with this.
I think it's such an important area, and it is one that as we get older we can do. Not so long ago, I interviewed Donna Griffin, who has started a program called Eldera.ai, which matches older people as mentors with mentees. It's not even so much tutoring, but it's relationship building and just giving people ways to be confident. And when people can do that, even if you're not mobile, if you're able to deal with the computer.
Yes, someone asked me recently, what could people do? And I said that if you can be the one that tells a young man whether or not to wear a jacket to a college interview, things like that.
Absolutely. Those are the really important things that people don't often have help knowing about, and just being able to talk about those kind of things are really important. It's absolutely true. You also, one of your chapters that I like, because I happen to have Dr. Seuss books, you focus a little on Dr. Seuss, and maybe you could talk a little about that. And there's one I underlined here, one of the comments you had of his, of don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. Could you talk a little about?
That's one of my favorites too, Dorian. And when you think about it, it makes more sense to smile because it happened than to spend your days weeping. Dr. Seuss had a really intelligent brain and taught us lots of things. This is one of them. Laughter is important, and that's one of the things that if you can be in groups, group laughter is better. But even if you're sitting home alone, a belly laugh is good for you.
Mm-hmm. It's true. There's even something called laughter yoga, which I'm not sure if it's still caught on, but I remember one time being part of a group, and one can just start laughing, and it becomes so contagious. It truly can be this deep belly laugh that you can bring about yourself.
Yes.
And then once people start laughing, other people start laughing. And humor is, you're absolutely right, the importance of humor. Is humor part of what helps you still feel a lot of joy in life?
I look for joy. I look for the good things that are happening. My twin grandchildren are graduating this year. My granddaughter is graduating in medicine. My grandson in law. These are wonderful things for me to think about. I may or may not have the strength or ability to fly out to where they are, but the fact that this is happening is something that fills me with joy, if that makes sense to you.
No, absolutely. It's feeling the joy of connection and the joy of accomplishment of other people and knowing you're part of their world, even if you can't. It's not as easy to travel out there. One of the nice things, too, with the Internet and with people can connect, and that's one of the silver linings, I think, of COVID, that we've seen there are other ways of connecting, and younger people can come visit you if it's harder to
absolutely.
Get to them.
And they do. And let me see. This Thanksgiving, I will have, my daughter will be here, and my son-in-law, and my son and his wife, and my grandson. So that's a pretty big dish for Thanksgiving.
That sounds like something nice to look forward to. So What about geriatric love? I know you talk about that.
Sorry, what did you say?
What about geriatric love, meeting people in the latter stages of life? You had an example yourself. And can you talk a little about that? Because a lot of times people think it's just not possible.
Geriatric love. I like to talk about it, and there is a chapter in the book about it.
Right.
I came home from Michigan, where I buried my husband, who had lived through 7 years of Alzheimer's disease before he died. I was convinced that I was looking ahead to a life of loneliness, because whoever heard of geriatric love, let me put it that way, someone introduced us, and we have been together now for 10 years, a little more than 10 years, and it is truly a blessing. I think that the being together, having someone to talk to, having someone to go out to a concert to if we decide to go. We have, as we age, we get tickets for everything, Dorian. But the rule is if one of us doesn't feel like going, neither of us goes. That's our way of looking at it. Because sometimes you're just a little too, I was going to say old, but just a little too fatigued to go to a concert that night, but you'll go next week.
Which sounds like another good coping skill, too, which is it's not an all or none. And so by buying the tickets and by just knowing maybe tonight's not a good night, I don't have much energy, doesn't mean I'm not going to ever do it again. But just tonight is not a good night.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's true.
You met, somebody introduced you. Do you have other thoughts or suggestions on how, I guess, the living situation can be part of it, of being around people and maybe having opportunities to meet either love partners or friends for companionship? Any other thoughts about relationships as we get older?
It can be a real problem. Mm-hmm. Our energy levels are less. Our opportunities are less. But I think that it's the best thing one can do is try to meet people when you can. Try to find the good luck that I found. It's not easy, but it's great to have found it.
No, absolutely. I know Connie Goldman, she did die last March at, I think, the age of 91, had written a number of books, and one of her books was about late life love. And she was an example, too, of having met her partner later in life. And there are some wonderful stories there of the importance of connection. I think we need love and we need touch from the minute we're born and to our death.
You're correct. And I think that the most important thing is to not bemoan the fact that you don't have someone in your life, but to keep looking for connections, because connections could be with a friend that is which can be very gratifying.
And not feel there has to be one kind. Or I think what I have found in my life is different friends sometimes meet different needs for you, and there can be different people that you talk about different issues with or spend time with. I want to integrate a few questions I have been integrating a few questions I know from Lourdes about intergenerational and about, she's calling in from the UK, intergenerational and finding joy. Alice from New York is asking a little more about the housing question, and she says, what do you do when you and your adult children start to fight about where you ought to move to, when you've been living alone in your own apartment quite happily and they are pushing for you to go into a senior living situation? Any thoughts on that?
I talk about that a little bit in the book. I think that we should try to keep our own identity and our own feelings, but sometimes we do get to a point where we have to listen to our children about our living situation. It's tricky, Dorian, because as people age, they may not realize that they are becoming less capable of taking care of themselves alone.
Mm-hmm. Do you have advice or a sense on maybe the adult children, ways they can bring things up to their parents about either the living situation or driving or other aspects of maybe not being able to manage things as well as they were?
I should say that there are times when the older children really have to take control because for reasons of physical health or mental health, the parent cannot no longer take charge of themselves. It's a very difficult situation in families, but safety has to come first.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that's true, and it is difficult, and it can be even more complicated if there are a number of different siblings and if people have different viewpoints. I know you mentioned in the book, and I've had other speakers who've talked about it too, of just the importance of when you're able, don't wait until it's too late when you can't say what is important to you, and the importance of having conversations. Can you talk a little about that?
It's difficult, but I think that what I think is important, look at yourself in the mirror and say to yourself, now, why are my children saying this to me? Sometimes we don't realize how old we have become, and reality comes into play when you look at yourself in the mirror. It's difficult for both the children and the parents, but as I said, safety first.
It does sound like that's a good rule of thumb. It's so hard in our society because there can be so much ageism, and so there's trying to find that right balance of wanting to be respectful so people can be as independent as they can be, but also knowing that we do change as we get older.
Described it very well.
So can you, there's a couple of questions too about dementia. I know you said you dealt with your husband over many years with his Alzheimer's. Any thoughts? Are you aware of any books or methods? Somebody mentioned there's a Montessori method for managing dementia. Do you know anything about that, or any thoughts on approaches that you've learned from your own experience or are aware of just in the medical world?
I'm not familiar with the latest literature on how to take care of someone with dementia. Do know from my own experience that it is very difficult and that you need help, often physical help, to take care of the physical needs of the person, but also you need, and I took advantage of this, I took my husband to a geriatric psychiatrist to see what the best way of treating him was. And as things got worse, I started back with that same psychiatrist to help me deal with the situation.
That sounds really important. That ties into a question from Marjorie in Arlington, Virginia, an offshoot of it. She wonders if you recommend that seniors work with a geriatrician, and if so, from what age and maybe what specialties?
Most of the geriatricians, those people that take care of old people, like pediatricians, those people that take care of young people. But there's not enough geriatricians out there in the market. Most of us elderly people go to their family doctor, their internist, that probably have experience with geriatric patients, but do not have a title in it. Finding a geriatrician would be difficult, but I think finding a good primary care doctor or staying with a good primary care doctor is the way to go.
somebody who gets to know you personally as issues come up. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's been so hard with COVID. Often more and more what I've been seeing and hearing from people is that, I guess maybe because we're all getting older, more and more primary care physicians that people have had for a long time are retiring, and then it's hard starting over with somebody new who doesn't know you.
You've touched on a real problem, Doreen, and the situation, I think, is keep trying.
That's good advice, yep.
I told a friend of mine who asked me, what about a doctor? My doctor left town. And I gave the name of my doctor, and evidently what happened was the doctor was not could only see new patients starting a year from then. And my friend decided that's too long to wait. But that's the way it goes. If you get an opening for someone, even if it's a year down the street, take it. You can always go to urgent care if there's an immediate problem.
That's true. And at least have it as a backup if you're still looking for other people, too. You also have a chapter about the importance of pets, which I think goes along with companionship and all. Can you talk a little about that?
About pets?
Yeah, pets.
Oh, by all means. What helped me get through the situation with my husband was my Mindy, my little doggy. I think pets are great. There's only one warning. If the pet gets to be too much for you, you may have to find other ways of. Let me start over again. If you get too stiff to pick up the doggy do, you may have to think this over or get a gadget that enables you to pick it up by yourself. But pets, I think, are an important part of life in Geriatrica.
Mm-hmm. I must say I agree with you, having this wonderful dog that we have, although they get sick too, which we're dealing with, which is hard.
Yes.
But so Susan from Victoria says, and I think you've spoken a little about it, but maybe have some other things to add. She says, I'm curious about what Dr. Heins considers the most important aspects we should know about advanced old age.
I think I would say on the tip of my tongue, without looking anything up, I think I would say staying as active as you can.
And in what ways have you found, I know you talk about it in the book too, how you've needed to make assessments and change some of your activity, but there's still some activity that you do.
It's very hard to face spinning downward, but you have to be honest with yourself and know we're not going to be able to do that. No, I can't join that board. No, I'm not going to be able to come to that party 500 miles away. I think we have to face ourselves, and again, that look in the mirror. We have to understand what we are able to do and what is getting too difficult for us to do. Try it.
It's not easy.
I was going to say it's not easy, but try it.
No, that's good advice. The trying it, the looking in the mirror, the trying to change our perception and see how other people both see what we can do, but also, again, you talk about optimism but realism, which I think I do that term, optimistic realism.
Yes.
I think that really is important. I'm just looking here for other questions that I want to integrate from other people. Can you talk a little bit more, while we still have a few more minutes, about the impact of COVID? I know that even in your first edition you wrote about it, and then you wrote more about it in your second edition. Can you just talk about, and I know some of it's still playing out, we don't know all the results, but
Yes.
And you mentioned about young kids, but our world, go ahead.
Our world has been affected by this tiny virus, and it's going to be with us forever. We're going to have to adjust to it and learn to take our preventive ways of keeping ourselves from getting, let me see. We have not had COVID, but we have had all of our shots and our boosters, and we are going to start getting shots for the Omicron. COVID has really affected our entire world. It is an amazing thing to watch. I'd rather be watching it than living in it because it has changed our life and our lifestyle. However, we will continue to learn more about it, and we will continue to be able to find new ways to help people prevent COVID. And I think we have to just be patient and hope for the best.
I think that makes sense. And also studies that I've seen, and I'd like your thoughts on it too, is that I guess the older we are, the more resilient because we've gone through so many things. And just thinking about, and you talk about it in your book, all of the life events that have happened in your 92 years. I haven't had all of those, but that there's something about knowing you can make it through things, in a sense. I wonder if you could speak to resilience a little bit in terms of that, or just what having had those experiences, how they impact you now, both with COVID and just dealing with older age.
You're absolutely right. It is, best way I could describe it is to keep looking for ways to prevent getting sick and keep looking for the new vaccines that will be coming out, and we will absolutely conquer this tiny virus. It may not happen next week or the week after, but we will conquer it.
So one other, let me just mention, because I know I want to respect people's time, but I have another question I want to ask you, and then we'll pull it together. Are you planning to write any more books? What are your plans for yourself?
No, I am not planning to write any more books. It's hard work. No,
it is hard work.
No more books. I read a lot, but I'm not going to write any more. I've written 3 books, and that's enough.
What are there any, as you were researching and doing books, any books that there were a couple of questions here about books, any books that you would recommend to people? There was one question in particular about any books on nutrition for people 65 plus, or just self-help books or books that you have found helpful that you would recommend to any of the listeners?
Oh, I'm looking around in my library. I've got lots of books. Many of them are outdated. I don't have any on nutrition, but there's so many books out there. One of the best ways is to Google books on nutrition and see what's out there, or to ask people, such as your doctor or the doctor's nurse, what they recommend.
Sounds like a good idea.
Mine are, as I am, pretty dated.
But I think that's a good idea. I'm always amazed of what the Internet's bittersweet, but it can be so helpful of resources and books. So that's a good suggestion. So how can people get your book? And let's just...
Okay. The new edition is about to come out, and then it will be available in books and on Amazon. You have actually seen the new edition,
yeah.
And I have not yet, because the publisher is just about ready to get it to me, but you got it first.
No, I haven't gotten the actual book, but I got the PDF of it.
You got the PDF.
Yeah, I got to read it, yeah.
The new book is going to be, certain things are going to be available. It is going to be available, it is going to be available in bookstores, and it's going to be available on Amazon. I don't know exactly when it is going to happen. The new book is going to have, there are going to be new books too, because there will be the word I'm thinking of, there will be a
large print or audio?
Yes, there will be a large print, and there will be, let me think, one more thing. At any rate, you can find out by going to, if you go to Amazon or if you go to your local bookstore, you can find out more about the book.
Great. Will there'll be an audio of it too?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Okay. Great. So Amazon or bookstores and audio and large print. I had seen that in the little publication for it. So before we end then, let me just double check. I don't think I have any more. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave the listeners with about this advanced old age, or things to think about and do when we're younger and healthier? Any kind of takeaways for you?
Accept it. Spend time outdoors. I have to giggle because it's too hot in Arizona right now to spend time outdoors, but do the best you can. Accept it, spend time outdoors, and try to be happy.
It sounds like some good advice. Any suggestions on how to be happy and cultivate joy?
Things
in addition to spending
doing, people that you like being with, even if it's only through the internet. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think those are definite words of wisdom, and I must say that I very much enjoyed the book and the cartoons with it. And I think for those of you, I really recommend that you read it. And there's incredible words of wisdom that you have in it, and just the notion of the fortitude of one foot in front of the other and accepting ourselves and doing as much as we can, but not more than we can, is some of my takeaways from it. But thank you so much, Marilyn. I know it's earlier in the morning for you there in Arizona, but thank you for taking the time, and I look forward to actually seeing the actual new edition, and stay well and safe. So take care.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and also for being online with so many young people.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care and stay well, everybody, and stay safe and well. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.